Hello, everyone, and welcome to another day in the neighborhood. So, this is where really, kind of when we get to the end of this, the war is going to formally be breaking out. Again, tensions had been getting worse and worse between the British and the American colonists for quite some time. It's finally today going to reach its breaking point. Okay. In retaliation, in many ways, for the Boston Tea Party, which the British naturally, justifiably so, I think, saw as a massive insult to them, and kind of the colonists flouting the authority of the British, saying that, you know what, you can't stop us, we don't care. Britain's going to respond with the coercive acts, which ultimately are going to be known by the colonists as the intolerable acts. Okay, and what the coercive acts do in 1774, as you can imagine, Boston's going to be the heart of so much of the criticism the British are going to throw at the colonies. Shuts down Boston Harbor until all that tea that was thrown overboard is paid for. Okay, and it also sets all these new terms for what the politics of Boston and largely kind of the whole colony of Massachusetts is supposed to or going to be, basically saying that all Massachusetts government officials must be appointed by the crown, not by local election. So they're not going to let the people of this area choose who represents them kind of in the legislature, that they are going to appoint people. That is the British. Naturally, they'd be appointing people who want to do whatever the British want to do. Meanwhile, all this kind of growing resistance, the Sons of Liberty, Samuel and John Adams, all those folks in Massachusetts, they're going to be taking a back seat and just going to have to not have their voices heard. Okay. Also, a part of that, most town meetings are just going to be outright banned. So people aren't able to get together to kind of create forms of resistance against the British. Okay. Also, and this is important, the British soldiers and officials, if they get in any trouble, are going to be tried in Britain, not the colonies. As you could expect, if they're going to be tried in Britain, they're going to get much better treatment than they would if they're tried over here in the colonies, because the colonists are going to be much more hostile towards them, and the British are basically going to let them off if they go back to Britain. Okay. Part of these coercive acts is also the Quartering Act, which allowed local officials to basically that, hey, you have to lodge British soldiers in private homes if necessary. So that means that no, they're not going to stay at an inn or a lodge or basically a motel or hotel, kind of using more modern terms, that you local officials have to house British soldiers. So that's going to be something that a lot of people don't like. I mean, that's going to be one of our very first amendments, is kind of banning the forced lodging of soldiers in response in many ways to this here. Okay. And again, the coercive acts is kind of what they're officially called by Parliament in Britain, but over kind of in here in the colonies, they're going to be known as the intolerable acts, because they're saying basically this is intolerable, this is indecent. The British are not giving us what we need or what we want, and that's a big problem. Okay. Also, colonists' right to a free trial. That's kind of gone out the window. That again, Britain is going to be much harsher in their punishments towards the colonists than the colonists would be against themselves. Okay. And also that any legislative assemblies that are meeting, especially in Massachusetts or in Virginia, are going to be direct violations of this, which means that people could be put in jail or maybe even, if worse, at worst, executed. Okay. So they're going to be called intolerable for a reason. Anytime you describe something as intolerable, basically you're saying this cannot exist, this cannot stand, this is prohibiting or life as we know it. Okay, so the intolerable acts, again, all this stuff shuts down the Boston Harbor until all that tea is paid for. Most town meetings just outright banned, and that, hey, you have to quarter or lodge soldiers in your own homes if necessary, which again, a lot of the colonists didn't like. Okay. So, as this is all reaching really its tipping point or breaking point in May of 1774, as I kind of mentioned, I think the last time, the House of Burgesses, which them and the Massachusetts colonial legislature are really kind of being the most aggressive kind of protests against the crown, are going to be dissolved after they're critical and criticize the arrival of more British troops. So, House of Burgesses, again, that goes all the way back to Jamestown, kind of in the earliest days of America. The House of Burgesses is one of the biggest early kind of incubators, if you want to call it that, of democracy, now is being unfortunately dissolved due to the British realizing how critical they're being of the arrival of more troops. And so in Virginia and elsewhere, remember when I talked about the committees of correspondence kind of in the last lecture, that this is going to be more and more calls for a colonial legislature or a colonial Congress that unites all of the colonies, not just kind of in the colonial legislatures, but all the colonies together. So those calls are going to get louder and louder. New York and Rhode Island, they all agree, and many others are going to begin to formulate their own proposals for what this colonial Congress may look like or resemble. And the very first meeting of this is going to take place. The First Continental Congress does indeed meet February 5th, 1774 in Philadelphia. As I've said already, Philadelphia is a really important city in the colonies. Arguably the most important. This would really be between that and Boston, but Philadelphia probably even more so. And Philadelphia, again, being a middle colony, lets those from the north and those from the south kind of come together to meet, okay? 12 of the 13 colonies is present. Almost all of them. You might be wondering, what's that other one that's not there? Well, it's actually Georgia, okay? Georgia didn't show up because they were actually still on the fence of whether or not they really needed to break away from Britain, okay? And again, you might say, oh, daggum Georgians. Think about it from their perspective, though, right? They're down there way at the southern tip of the colonies. They're right there, kind of where almost at the edge of the wilderness, so to speak, that while British technically controlled Florida during this time, it still has a lot of remnants of Spanish culture and Spanish values. And also, in particular, Georgia was getting ready to go to war with possibly a Native American tribe. And so they needed British assistance. So they were a lot more worried, like, well, we actually kind of need the British. We don't necessarily aware of if we're going to break away or not. And so that was a big thing. But even you see 12 out of 13, that's a lot. Not everyone coming there was totally dead set on, hey, we need to break away from Britain. There's a lot of people in the middle or more people on that loyalist side who are going to be more willing to stick up for Britain or stay with Britain. So just because 12 out of 13 are showing up doesn't mean they're all willing and ready to fight just that moment, okay? Because, again, there were moderates, those who said, listen, yeah, the Intolerable Acts, we don't like that. We kind of want to repeal that. But maybe we can compromise with Britain. So they're saying, well, yeah, we don't like that. But ultimately, they still thought of themselves in some ways as British and thought, well, maybe the Parliament, the Crown, the King can listen to us and compromise with us. So that's the more moderate position. Meanwhile, you got those from Virginia, those from Massachusetts that would be hardcore patriots saying, no, we need to break away as quick as we can. Again, those radicals saying, no, the time for compromise is over. We've had about 10 years of compromise. We had about 10 years of doing whatever the British told us to do. We're ready to fight, okay? So that First Continental Congress, they kind of come up with some key pieces of legislation or kind of decisions, one of which is going to be that they endorse this thing known as the Suffolk Resolves, okay? The Suffolk Resolves urged colonists to kind of say, hey, do not obey or buy into the coercive acts, that the people of Suffolk in particular need to begin arming themselves and boycott British goods, okay? And they said, listen, we express loyalty to the king, that we're not trying to disrespect the king too much just yet, okay? But he needs to condemn the coercive acts, and if he doesn't, we're going to form a non-importation association. So those non-importation kind of agreements I mentioned in a previous day where they're not buying any British goods coming off the ships, that was, again, a more local or colony by colony thing. But this is saying, hey, all of us colonies need to step up and kind of have be on the same page with one another, okay? So this is going to try to further enforce boycotts on British goods. So yet again, they're saying we don't need to buy from Britain. That's going to hurt the British economy. And we need to kind of build up our own industries here in the Americas, right? That here in the America, we can create our own economy. We can create our own goods. Why should we have to buy from Britain, especially when they're levying all those taxes against us, okay? So it kind of ends on a mildly optimistic note. Okay, they think maybe these Suffolk Resolves will work. Maybe if we threaten that we're not going to buy any more British goods, that will be enough to kind of keep things as they are. But they kind of said, all right, this is the First Continental Congress. next year in May of 1775, let's all come back together and kind of have a progress report and see where we're at, that we can judge our progress by that point to see if further action needs to be taken. But again, for the most part, they're wanting to do this non-violently. They're wanting to kind of put their best foot forward for Britain. But again, as you see there, as it says, some people are saying we need to start arming ourselves to prepare for something more drastic. There were people that were willing more to go to war, but most of them, while very angry and very agitated, were still not quite willing to go that far just yet. But again, that's going to change over time because, again, New England is kind of the most radical part of the country. Boston and Massachusetts and kind of those surrounding areas are going to be the kind of the most hardcore patriotic, okay? So these local militias are going to start to pop up all throughout the colonies, again, especially in New England, but even sometimes in the middle colonies and even in the southern colonies. The southern colonies actually were among the more prone to be loyalists. I'll talk about that in a little bit, okay? But again, local militia. So it's not like this one large colonial militia. It's kind of like, say, Newton has a little militia. Hickory has its own little militia. Go my way, kind of in Caldwell County, Hudson or Granite Falls or Lenoir. All these little towns or villages or communities all have their own little militias, okay? So a lot of local militias are popping up all across the map, mostly in New England, but also even in the middle and southern colonies, okay? So Concord, Massachusetts, we say Concord here in, kind of North Carolina, but up there they call it Concord. Concord, Massachusetts organizes a special unit trained at, quote, stand at a minute's warning in case of alarm. This is where we get the term Minutemen. You may have heard of them before, okay? So they're basically, think of them this way. They thought of themselves as the first responders, right? That if something's going to happen, if the British are going to start acting more aggressively, we're going to be the ones who are right on the front lines, the first one to fight, the first one to shoot, the first one's likely to die, okay? So these guys understand that. They kind of see themselves as the first responders of if any armed conflict between us and Britain happens, the Minutemen are going to be the name of them, okay? And you probably may have heard of them before, okay? Colonies also, again, creating provincial congresses and militias. So that's mostly happening on the local level. But then even the larger colonies like Massachusetts, like Virginia, like North Carolina, like Pennsylvania, are starting to try to create maybe also colonial-wide militias. So you got the local ones, and then the colonies are trying to create whole ones for themselves, okay? And as well as provincial congresses, which is kind of going a step further than what the old congresses or legislatures were at the time, to being more about, no, we're not going to give in to whatever the crown's telling us to do. We're creating our own identity for ourselves. And naturally, you're thinking, okay, well, where are they going to get the weapons from, right? Because, yeah, sure, some weapons are being made here in the colonies, but for the most part, weapons were imported from Britain. Britain was the one who was really making weapons and then maybe would sell or send them over here to the Americas, okay? Well, one way they kind of try to start arming themselves is through starting to break into military depots and armories, raiding the armories and depots, and getting the stuff out of there and getting ready that way. So basically stealing weapons from the British. As you can imagine, this is going to start to, on one level, obviously anger the British, but they can't immediately sometimes get there to stop it from happening, okay? But especially the problem for Britain is that their influence and prestige in regions throughout the country is just slowly slipping by the day, right? How can they kind of say that we're the authority here when all their places are getting broken into and all their weapons are being taken from them, right? So kind of Britain is the big brother, that they're strong, that they're not going to kind of take any guff from us colonists. That's going to start to slip away slowly but surely because, again, it's kind of their depots and their armories are being broken into, and the colonists are saying, what are you going to do, stop us? So, again, that's going to go a long way in terms of eroding that British influence, okay? Now, again, I've mentioned this already before, and I've even mentioned it a little bit today, this whole divide between loyalists and patriots, okay? So what was up with that? Well, loyalists, again, also had the nickname of Tories. They were generally Americans who supported or were sympathetic to the British cause. This did not mean exactly that they bought into everything the king said, okay, because sometimes they said, well, the king needs to make some changes in parliament. Maybe they could be a little helpful more to us. But you know what? We've spent our whole colonial identities as being part of the British, kind of area and part of the British influence and British Empire, okay? We don't know if we need to break away from them, that maybe we need to stay with Britain. Now you might be thinking, what types of people are going to be kind of generally supportive of this position? Well, local government officials, and that's not necessarily saying kind of people in the state legislatures or the colonial legislatures, although that was some, but more people who are officials like tax collectors, people who are, enforcing the British law or British government in the Americas. So tax collectors were the biggest one of those. But anyone who represented the crown here in the America, naturally, they're going to be more supportive of the British because that's where they're making their money and that's where their loyalties lie. Okay. Also, Anglican ministers, again, the Anglican Church is the official church of England. So Anglican ministers are going to be part of that. Also, some wealthy kind of coastal merchants who make a lot of money thanks to the British, they're naturally going to be more supportive of that, as well as some wealthy landowners, people who really the status quo as it's going is doing just fine for them. Why do they want to break away and kind of form this whole other thing? That they're doing just fine. They're making lots of money, okay, that why should they break away? Now, a general thing you can see about all these groups of people right there are they naturally have something to lose. That they're most of them are at a wealthy status in life or a comfortable status at the very least. And so, why do we want to endanger that by siding with these kind of patriots, right, that are popping up all across the country? Okay. But a notable exception to that is going to be some of these backcountry farmers. Some of the farmers who are more on the wilderness area in the western parts of the colonies, they think, well, maybe only the king can protect us, right? That he has the authority to send troops to fight us. Maybe he can be the one to protect us. Now, again, this is going to be kind of a little bit of a contradiction because these were the same people who would fight the French and Indian War and do it mostly without the help of Britain. But here they are again thinking that the British are going to come and save them, okay? Geographically, where are these people mostly located? As I said, actually in the South, for the most part, Georgia, North and South Carolina, at first are going to tend to be a little more loyalist, okay? As well as this goes further up north, the colony of New York, okay, at first is going to be much more loyalist. And again, think about like South Carolina, Charleston, again, one of those cities that has so many British goods coming through it, and that helped build cities like Charleston in the South. Why would they want to break away from Britain if you think about it, right? But then on the other side, naturally, the ones we would most be willing to think of are going to be patriots, okay? Also known as Whigs, and the Whig Party is something that comes about many years later that I'll talk about, okay, establishment of America. Patriots, who are they? Naturally, they're the one thinking the British are tyrants. The British are making, and this is language they often use, the British are making us slaves. We're paying taxes, which again is a bit disingenuous because actual slavery of African Americans and some Native Americans were happening in the Americas. So that's not really fair. But we don't like paying these taxes. We think the British are tyrants. We need to break away. Okay. Who are these type of people? Artisans, farmers, merchants, lawyers, and urban workers. Also, generally speaking, people of a more middle class background. Okay. Because again, these people up here, a little more upper class, have a little bit more to, something to lose. Meanwhile, the patriots, for the most part, are going to be more working class, more blue collar, even though that term really wouldn't exist exactly, but the same kind of idea. People who generally said, listen, life's okay right now, but a lot of my problems that I'm facing on a daily basis are because I'm having to pay taxes, is because the British are ruining my day, okay? And hey, you know what? I identify more as somebody from this colony than I do as a British person, right? So that's going to kind of be a key distinction there. Where are they at? Especially New England and Virginia. As I said, New England's the most radical part of the country that's wanting to kind of give into this. Virginia as well. Again, two massively influential places because most of our founding fathers are going to come from New England and from Virginia. Not all, but for the most part, many of them are. I mean, you're talking the Adamses, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, all of those folks all come from either New England or Virginia. Okay, so again, this is a massively influential part of the country. Okay, now I want to emphasize this too. There's going to be loyalists and patriots in all the colonies. Okay, there's going to be some patriots in the South who want to break away, and at the same time, there will be loyalists up in the more northern regions that want to stay, that keep things as they are. So don't overgeneralize in terms of the geography. Okay, there's going to be some in both areas. Okay, and another big distinction is there were more patriots than loyalists. Okay, it was like anywhere between 25 to 30% for either side. Okay, but maybe a little more patriots. But the majority of the colonists are in the middle. They don't really know one way or another. They kind of sympathize with both sides. Okay, so again, some were like, well, we don't like the British. We think they are giving us too high taxes, and we identify more as colonists than we do the British. But that's a big step to break away. Okay, so again, the majority of people at the beginning of this war are going to be in the middle, right? There are going to be people in the middle who don't really want to rock the boat, okay? And you have, again, a little bit more patriots than loyalists, but most people are in the middle. I mean, quite frankly, thinking about it myself, putting myself in the shoes of somebody at the time, I probably would have, frankly, been somewhere in the middle, okay? Because stepping away from Great Britain at this particular time in world history was a massive step, one that I don't know if I would have been necessarily courageous enough to take, okay? So being honest, I'm not sure which way I would have leaned, okay? Now, ultimately, I think the patriotic cause was a great one and really swayed over the hearts and minds of the colonists over time. But at first, it's a big question mark, right? And that's something we need to really remember. And this is kind of a piece of propaganda showing that, hey, if you're a loyalist, this is what's going to happen to you. But it's actually kind of against the patriots, if that makes any sense, saying that these patriotic people are akin to Native Americans who are just going to slaughter you, kill you, and leave you out to dry. Okay, so this is actually kind of a piece of pro-loyalist propaganda that's saying, look how savage these patriots are by executing these loyalists. Okay, so the very first shots of this American Revolution are going to be formally fired in Lexington and Concord. In April of 1775, General Gage is going to order the arrest of this Massachusetts Provincial Congress. So again, they were supposed to be a kind of outright banned, but they were still secretly getting together behind closed doors and meeting. Okay, the king knew this, General Gage knew this, so he's saying, hey, send a militia, kind of not a militia, but the actual British Army in there and break this up. Okay, so they're going to march on the city of Concord to seize a lost supply depot that was British. They had been taken over by the colonists, like I said, to steal their weapons. Okay, which took them through the town of Lexington. Okay, Paul Revere, my homie here, got my Paul Revere bell. Okay, William Dawes and Dr. Samuel Prescott, they're kind of part of the Sons of Liberty and part of these militias. Their task is to warn the cities of Lexington, not really cities, more the towns of Lexington and the towns of Concord, hey, that the British are on their way. Okay, so on April 19th of 1775, the British and local militiamen are going to exchange fire in Lexington and force the militia retreat. Okay, so the militia outnumbered by the British, they're going to be forced to retreat. But really, the first shots of the revolution, again, are fired on April 19th, 1775. And again, Paul Revere very famously kind of marched through the towns of Lexington and Concord, he actually said, the regulars are coming, and that meant the British regular army. Okay, but over time, we've kind of mythically adapted that to the British are coming, but the same basic thing. Okay, so the British army forces back the militia, and they're going to say, okay, we're going to continue on the way to Concord, okay? That depot is yet again found empty, so that depot had already been raided by the militias, and instead of really finding the weapons, they all of a sudden find 400 colonial militiamen, okay? And they're going to exchange fire there, and now the British are going to be forced to retreat because they are outnumbered by the colonists, okay? So again, at this particular moment and juncture, they're going to be surprised that this force was there at all, and the British forced to retreat. Okay, so what's the aftermath of this? Well, the British are going to head home to Boston. That's kind of their closest base of sorts. Okay, And when they get there, they also all of a sudden realize that they are surrounded and outnumbered by militias in Boston. So again, Massachusetts, the most radical part of the country, the most patriotic part of the country at this point, they've surrounded and outnumbered the British Army. Okay. All told, the British are going to lose 99 men, 174 wounded, compared to the Colonials, 49 killed and 46 wounded. So this kind of first battle, if you want to call it that, of the Revolution is going to be in favor of the colonists. The colonists got the job done. Okay. And so this is really kind of a moment of crisis for everyone involved. Okay. This is a moment of crisis, most certainly for the colonists, because we're like, okay, we've officially formed a militia and officially we have killed British troops. This really raises the temperature, really raises things, especially in New England, but all throughout the colonies as well. New England, or Old England, okay, Britain realizes, oh crap, now this thing has gotten serious. This isn't just they're throwing tea overboard anymore. This is that they're willing to kill British soldiers, okay? So both sides now really rising to the occasion and saying, uh-oh, is there a way out of this? As it turns out, there's not going to be, but starting kind of tomorrow and talking about a little bit of the lecture for the next day, you might watch this right after, we're going to see that, no, this turns out was the breaking point. Okay, so the war has really officially began, but how is the war going to be fought? That's going to be an open question that's going to be answered over the next few years. Okay, so this is Mr. Huffman signing off for today. As always, if you have any questions or any concerns, please reach out to me, and take care.